What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Dunk on AP podcast. Today we are talking topic 8.4, the spread of communism after 1900. So without further ado, let's go dunk on AP. So to contextualize the big country that falls to communism, China, in 1949, let's move back a little bit and talk about the fall of the Qing dynasty. So the Qing dynasty was led by non-Chinese Manchurians, and you had several rebellions leading to their weakening, and they're going to eventually be overthrown by revolution that's led by Sun Yat-sen in 1911. This is going to mark the end of the Qing dynasty. Sun Yat-sen became the first provisional president and leader of the Kuomintang. So the 1911 revolution, Sun Yat-sen briefly serves as president of the Republic of China. Yuan Shikai is sworn in a few months later as second president of the ROC, the Republic of China, and the capital is moved to Beijing. Economic conditions did not improve from what they had been in the Qing dynasty in this new era of China. So what you're going to get is a Chinese civil war with the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, and the Kuomintang Chinese Nationalist Party led by Sun Yat-sen. Both parties joined forces as the first united front to fight the warlords in the north, which were preventing a unified central government for China. This union was supported by the Soviet Union. Now, in the Canton coup, you get the rise of Chiang Kai-shek, a very important guy in Chinese history. Sun Yat-sen made a deal with the Soviet Union for military and financial aid for the First United Front. Sun dies in 1925 from cancer. Commander Chiang Kai-shek suspected communist and Soviet plots against him. Chiang Kai-shek had CCP members and Soviet advisors arrested in Guangzhou, modern-day Canton. So what's going to happen is that Chiang Kai-shek will order a purge of communists from all of China in April 1927. You get massacres, arrests, and public executions occurring in Shanghai. The Soviet Union cuts ties with the KMT under Chiang Kai-shek. So the Chinese Civil War really begins between nationalists and communists after that. So the Communist Revolution timeline, the KMT and the CCP unite to fight warlords and foreign imperialism through the First United Front. Then the Shanghai Massacre under Chiang Kai-shek starts the Chinese Civil War. Mao leads the communists and Chiang leads the nationalists. The Second United Front is formed, and Mao and Chiang join forces to fight the Japanese occupation of China. The Chinese Civil War resumes after Japan is defeated in World War II. Chairman Mao Zedong proclaims the founding of the People's Republic of China, and Chiang Kai-shek and the nationalists are forced into the island of Taiwan in 1949. So Mao's communist forces win the Civil War in 1939, and China falls to communism, something that you can imagine is very freaky to America because now the biggest country by size in the world is communist in the Soviet Union, and the biggest country by population in the world, in China, is now communist. So some contributing factors to the Communist Revolution in China: internal tensions. There were poor economic conditions, especially for peasants. That's always a good starting point for communism if you want it to take over, is poor economic conditions in your country. The KMT under Chiang Kai-shek was anti-communist. The CCP was supported by the Soviet Union and expanded under the leadership of Mao Zedong, who appealed to the peasant class. The KMT and the CCP were engaged in a civil war. But some other contributing factors to communist revolution in China was Japanese aggression. Japan invaded Manchuria in the Second Sino-Japanese War from 1937 to 1945. Chiang Kai-shek had to pause his pursuit of the CCP during the Chinese Civil War to fight the Japanese invasion. KMT nationalists took huge hits while fighting Japan, but Mao's guerrilla tactics allowed CCP forces to grow. So you're going to get the founding of the People's Republic of China in 1949, or PRC, under the leadership of Mao Zedong. So you're going to get land reform before the PRC was established in 1949. Mao believed the peasants should be mobilized and empowered to overthrow wealthy landowners. This led to struggle sessions in which landlords were often publicly killed by peasants. New land reform laws were introduced in 1950 that reduced violence against the landlords. Land was redistributed to peasants through the land reform movement in China. Remember, that's a big part of communism, is land redistribution. Now, this leads to the Great Leap Forward. This was a 5-year plan modeled on the one that the Soviets implemented in 1958. And remember that China had tried the self-strengthening movement under the Qing dynasty, but it doesn't work. It's really ineffective. So in most ways, it's ineffective. It's definitely not as effective as something like the Meiji Restoration in Japan. The goal of the Great Leap Forward was to produce huge amounts of wheat and steel for export using rural peasant labor on communes. Yields were greatly exaggerated as an attempt to gain favor with higher ups. So people were basically lying about the amount of food that they were producing, and that's leading to the idea that, oh, we have enough food to go around, but they didn't. Most grain was taken for export, and famine resulted in millions dying in China. Millions dying in China. So with the Great Leap Forward, peasants are going to get diverted from farming to help reach huge, unrealistic steel quotas. That's going to reduce the grain output. They're also going to use wood to fuel backyard furnaces. This was inefficient fuel that stripped the land and compromised homes. Scrap metal from pots, pans, and other household goods was used for steel production. This resulted in extremely low quality steel that had no value, and people sacrificed cooking utensils in this effort. So the end result was that no usable steel was produced, no industrialization occurred, food production declined, peasants sacrificed their labor and personal goods, and the plan was quietly abandoned in 1959. So, because of the maybe slightly declining popularity of Mao Zedong in 1966, you're going to get the launch of the Cultural Revolution in China. This lasts from 1966 to Mao's death in 1976, and that marks Mao's return to supreme power in China. He mobilized the students of the country to rebel against both traditional elements of Chinese culture and against anyone who did not fervently support Mao. These students were the Red Guard, and it was a period of violence and chaos. Huge massacres took place, and the destruction of much of China's historical artifacts also took place. So, that is the Cultural Revolution in China. Now, turning to Vietnam and in land reform there. So, land reforms begin in Vietnam with the communist Viet Minh who waged war against French colonial landowners in northern Vietnam from 1945 to 1954. From 1954 to 1975, the Viet Cong used land reform to aid peasants and gain support in South Vietnam during the Vietnam War. Also, land was collectivized in the 1970s after the communist North won the Vietnam War. And then also in the 1980s, collectives were abolished in the 1980s and more liberal land laws were enacted, which boosted Vietnamese production. Now, moving on to the Ethiopian Empire, which lasted from 1270 to 1974. So, under the imperial rule of Emperor Haile Selassie, Ethiopia had a extremely complex land system that included over 100 distinct forms of land ownership. So Selassie is going to rule from 1930 to 1974, by the way, in Ethiopia. So the southern Ethiopia had high numbers of landless peasants who worked land and paid tribute to the landowners. And Haile Selassie proposed a new tax system in 1966 that was met with resistance from the noble landowning class, who generally avoided taxes. This sway from the landowners stirred discontent among the landless peasants. It's going to help lead to the Ethiopian revolution. So, Selassie's inability to implement land reform was a big contributing factor to the revolution. In 1975, the Derg established military control of Ethiopia and implemented radical land reform as a Marxist Leninist state. This was going to be land to the tiller reform, and that's going to nationalize all land. And also, under the leadership of Mengistu Haile Mariam, farmland was collectivized so resources could be pooled. Um, so basically, what's going to happen is the Ethiopian the Ethiopian land reform is going to be a revolution in which you have Marxist Leninists who take over the country, and it's going to lead to land reform there. So you're going to get this also happening. You're also going to have some land issues in Bengal with the zamindars of Bengal. So the Barhatam Raj estate was an example of a powerful and expansive zamindar. And remember, zamindars are hereditary landowners, and that existed from 1657 to 1955. They owned about 5,000 square miles of land in West Bengal, and landless tenants worked the land and paid rent. The zamindar system was a type of feudal system that came to an end in West Bengal in 1955 when land reform legislation was passed. So, with the West Bengal Land Reform Act of 1955, it aimed to do the following: abolish the zamindari system, distribute surplus land to landless farmers, called tenants, and also cap the total amount of land one person could own while controlling rent and evictions to protect tenants. So, you're also going to get land reform in southern India in Kerala. You had Jinmis, who were landowning aristocracy of Kerala. Uh, a communist government peacefully elected was peacefully elected in Kerala in 1957. They introduced the Land Reforms Ordinance, and this placed a cap on the amount of land one family, mostly Jinmis, could own, and excess land was redistributed to landless farmers. So, some leadership changes also were happening in Iran. You had Reza Shah Pahlavi, who was the Shah of Iran from 1925 to 1941. He was forced out by the Allies during World War II. Then you had Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. He was U.S. and Britain installed Shah of Iran from 1941 to 1951 when he fled the country. Then you have Mohammad Masagda. He was a democratically elected prime minister who was overthrown by the U.S. and Britain. And then you get the reinstallation of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi as Shah in 1954, and he remained until the Iranian Revolution in 1979. The White Revolution, as it is known, abolished the feudal system by way of the government purchasing land from the elite landowners and reselling it at a discount to peasants. About 9 million peasants benefited from that reform. Also, the reforms that you get from that are women's rights, literacy and education, nationalization of water resources. So you also get some land reform in Latin America. Guatemala in 1952, decree 900 redistributed all uncultivated land in Guatemala on estates larger than 672 acres. About one-sixth of the population received land, and this is considered the most successful case of land reform in history. In Nicaragua, in 1979, the Sandinistas' political reform included land reform, but it was muddled in corruption, and much redistributed land went directly to prominent Sandinistas. Then Bolivia in 1952, 92% of the land belonged to large estates until the Bolivian National Revolution in 1952. Rural property gets redistributed to indigenous peasants. So this has been about the growth of communism after 1900 with some talk about land reform as well. If you have any questions, please let me know.